Yeah, thanks very much for having me and for the opportunity to give a close keynote here. So difficult to follow up on the previous speakers. So yeah, it's super sad to hear the current state of things. And mine kind of feels a little silly because it was a little upbeat when there's so many like real problems. But at the same time, I'll have a go anyway. So my name is Marcus Cáceres. I work for Mozilla. I've been doing web standards now for about more than 10 years, maybe 11 years. I'm fortunate enough to have been kind of mentored by Liddy's son, Charles. I don't know if many of you have met Charles, but so via Charles, I got a lot of Liddy because he would always say, my mom, my mom. So I was like, so yeah, if you've met Charles, you probably know. But Charles also obviously a huge accessibility advocate, and through him, I became quite passionate about it as well. So in standards, or in web standards, particularly W3C, obviously everything we do has accessibility really at its heart. So other things that I do, I'm part of Mozilla's DOM team, the document object model, which is essentially the JavaScript APIs that are used to communicate with a web page. And on a different level, there's kind of the accessible parts of that, which I'll get to later on. So I'm here mostly to talk to you about filling out forms, web forms. So we've been doing forms like people who have been using the web for a very long time. So the web's been around for about 25 years or so. Forms were introduced quite early on. So we've had a lot of experience with filling out forms. They're not the funnest things in the world. So here's your typical form. It's a general input. So what I'm showing at the screen at the moment is a form from Amazon.com, just saying like something like shipping address, where you would input your name, where you live, and city and so on. So what's interesting about forms, if we start to actually look at and deconstruct these things, is that essentially you have a little input type, so what type it is, so it's a text, is it a date. Forms can be fairly accessible, or inputs can be fairly accessible, as they are, as long as you can associate a label with them and so on. One other feature that they provide is validation, which is obviously very important. So you can check that, is the date valid, for instance, is your email valid, and so on. So this ability to have feedback with the users kind of built into forms as well. But as we know, forms can be annoying to fill out. It doesn't matter if you're filling them out on keyboard or using a mobile device or any other device. Forms are boring to fill out, especially when you go to one website and another, and it's constantly having to repeat the same information over and over again. So wouldn't it be great if we could find a solution to that? So as I mentioned, with input types, the neat thing with input types, if you can actually say, like, this is an email, you can actually provide specified inputs or specific inputs for instance email. So we could have a keyboard, for instance, with an @ key. Or if you have like a telephone number, you don't need letters most of the time. You might just need numbers. And even special symbols just for telephones. So there's limitations, obviously, with that. So we can't really express what data is expected there. And another thing that we can't do is like take again, the shipping address example. It's like we can't really express what the intent of the overall form is. So it's like, what is this form for? So wouldn't it be neat if we could kind of start looking at that problem? So what are general, people are filling out a lot of forms online. If we could basically figure out, okay, what are they trying to do? We could maybe do something interesting with that. So we kind of started working on that with HTML and HTML5. So the idea was that if you have this autocomplete attribute, you can tell a form, look, this is the person, what I need here is the person's first name. And what I need here is the person's last name. Or everyone's had to enter a new password, for instance. So you can tell the web browser in this case, hey, the user really needs a new password here. And the browser, for instance, can generate you a new password, or it could be their current passwords that you want. So as you know, and what I'm alluding to is something that you've all probably experienced is that browsers remember information about you and then they fill that in. So there's this whole idea of autofill. So web browsers have this autofill database that's constantly keeping track of all form information. So let me just show you a quick demo of that when you combine types and autocomplete using VoiceOver. So I'll enable VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on Safari, localhost 8080/examples/inputs.html window, web,
So
telephone, edit text with autofill menu. To open the autofill menu, press the up or down arrow key, then press the return key to enter it into the form. You are currently on a text field inside of web content. To enter text in this field, type. To open the autofill menu, press the up or down arrow key, then press the return key to enter it into the form. To exit this web area, press Control, Option, Shift, up arrow.
it can be a little blah blah, as everyone knows. So, but the key there was that I have, and as you can see on the screen, and as you heard as well, is you have this option to go into autofill.
Autofill your contact
and
info,
select a
Marcos
contact,
Cáceres.
which is really neat. So now you have access to a contact, which is myself. So I can fill this out
Closing.
with me.
Autofill
There's
popover group.
me,
6 items, image. You are currently on an image.
right? And then I can say like autofill, having heard that it's me, the contact, I can autofill with that.
0420852221. Content selected, telephone, edit text with autofill menu. To open the autofill menu, press the up or down arrow key, then press the return key to enter it into the form.
So I'll
VoiceOver
disable
off.
that. So that gives you an idea of essentially how you can use this. You know, by remembering that information, having access to contacts, you can essentially fill forms out. So that is the power of combining input types with autocomplete. So that's pretty cool, right? So here on the screen, I'm now showing basically exactly what I just showed before. But here it is in Firefox, for instance. So again, the same information. You have the ability to have multiple profiles. So they say, this is for me, this is for my partner, and I'm filling this out. So for instance, I was doing a moving house where I had to fill out this information, and I happen to have in my autofill database my partner's information. So her information can go straight in as well. It's not the best for anybody who's had a bad autofill experience where it accidentally gets confused and it fills out the wrong information. That's not the greatest. So again, we can go back to this question. So right now I'm showing a picture of a dog that's in a room that's on fire, and the dog is saying, this is fine. So it's not fine, and I'll talk about why it's not fine. So one problem, so I speak a lot at developer conferences, and developers are not using the autocomplete attribute. So educators out there, please encourage more use of autocomplete because it really helps. So what about the intent of the form? I talked about like if we're doing something, we may be able to figure out like, okay, this person's, for instance, trying to go shopping or do something like that. So that's the one that I want to move into now. So we have an actually tackling just the problem of shopping online. And shopping can include things not just buying stuff or selling stuff, but also like donations and things like that. So we do a lot of commerce online. And we've been doing commerce for many millennia. So we kind of understand that problem. And we've been doing e-commerce for a long time as well. In the time, or in the last few years, there have been a lot of proprietary work done in payments, particularly like things like Microsoft Wallet, which probably, who has an Xbox here? Anybody? No? One person. I don't either. So, but anyway, I only mention it because people don't know they have Microsoft Wallet. It turns out like Xbox users have Microsoft Wallet. You probably never heard of it. But maybe Android Pay. Anybody used Android Pay? A couple of people. What about Apple Pay? Yeah, so there is like a fairly good mix of people who have used these proprietary technologies. So let's talk about those because they're kind of interesting from an accessibility perspective. So these technologies enable various things in as far that they allow for biometric uses. So for instance, using a fingerprint. And also like the phone provides haptic feedback. So there are different auditory and visual cues that come into play that allow you to basically use this technology even if you're a fully able person, sometimes you're holding things or whatever, and you don't have full access to both hands, you can still use this technology. So it makes it much more accessible to everybody. Recent addition on, for instance, the Apple side, and something that's been available for anybody that has a Microsoft tablet, paying with your face is a thing. Paying with your face wasn't a thing, right? So again, no need to type things because it can authorize you to make a payment for things just using your face. So these are neat things. I talked a little bit about haptic feedback, again, with Apple Watch. So you don't even need to see it. You can just double tap and hold it up to a reader and beep, you've paid for something. So these things really can help basically everybody. So on the web, we got a little jealous. It's like, gee, it wouldn't be great if we could have this stuff too, and we could make it available to everybody. So we started working on this specification. It's primarily driven by people at Microsoft and Google, and then Mozilla got involved a little bit later. So I've been working on this spec, so I've kind of taken over as lead editor of this one recently, and it's called the Payment Request API. And what it allows us to do is basically tap into these payment systems. And I'll talk about why this is great for accessibility in a sec. So the great thing is that we have it across all the web browsers. So it's going to ship in Safari later this year. They're working on it right now. Same with Firefox. It's already in Edge and in Chrome. And Facebook even joined the party. You'll be surprised when I mention Facebook amongst browsers. Facebook is actually on mobile the third largest browser or the second largest browser. And you wouldn't even think about it, that it's a web browser. But it actually is. It has 9% of all interactions with the web happen through Facebook, which is insane. So imagine they have 2 billion active users. Yeah, it's a big number. So anyway, combined, yeah, good 3 billion people are able to access this technology, or will be able to access it fairly soon. So I'll give you a little demo of it. And that's not the one I want. So right now I'm just showing how you would do a payment by basically just clicking on a website. You would go to checkout, and this would bring up a payment sheet. From the payment sheet, you can essentially select the payment method that you want. This is, again, just a concept prototype. So you would select, for instance, your Visa payment method. Continue forward. And then now it'll make sense why I showed you the autofill thing. So as part of that, for instance, you go to fill out your name, and because the browser already knows your details, it can, boom, automatically grab those details for you. So essentially, the form has been filled out. Proceed. So we continue forward. Put in credit card number. Again, remembers me. And so again, not my real credit card that I'm entering at the moment. It's hilarious how many fake, I Google images of credit cards now because I use them for testing. I have all these fake credit cards. So I can now preview the payment, and it shows you the total, and it shows you where it's shipping to. It shows you reaffirm your card, again, in an accessible manner. So we could be experiencing this through a screen reader, and then we're able to press pay. And I'm not online, but it would show a little pay thingy. So once the payment process goes through, it completes, and everyone's happy. So you've made a purchase. The second time around, if we were to go through that process, it would be a one-click process because now the web browser has my credit card details. So similar experience in Chrome. Again, so I'm now navigating, fully keyboard accessible payment sheet where I can go in and, for instance, let's go, I don't know, choose a payment method, select that one, and back, and so on. So that just gives you an idea of the work we've been doing. So this idea of centralizing payments into one accessible sheet so you don't have to deal with the pain of every website that you go to, it may or may not be accessible, that's all taken away. So from that perspective, it's great because now we have, essentially a centralized way of having accessible payments on the web. So a consistent, saved experience. You don't need to type freaking credit card numbers out, get your credit card out, and go through that pain. You only have to go through that pain once. Well, hopefully, as people adopt this API. So just quickly, for those that are a little bit more on the technical side, essentially we have, for the payments, we have the methods, how you want to pay for things. Also, what you're actually buying. So we can create a list of like, oh, you're buying, I don't know, socks and some, I don't know, laundry, detergent, I don't know. The options that are needed to complete the transaction. So for instance, if you're buying a digital good, that would be like, I need your email to complete this purchase, or I need your physical address, or I need your phone number to complete this purchase. And again, I talked about error handling for forms. We have that built in as well, which is really nice. So if, for instance, you want to buy a fridge and you're in, I don't know, you want to buy it from the US, for instance, it's like, well, we're not going to ship you a fridge. We don't ship fridges from the US to here, to Australia. Things like that, it will tell you as well. So, and we've done it in a way that allows we can basically signal these errors back to this payment sheet and surface them in an accessible way as well. So not only accessible, but in an internationalized way as well. And the sheet's also privacy preserving. So really interesting, we're working together with Apple, who really pioneered the space. They're super privacy conscious folks over there. So they've been great at like, for instance, when you go to like put in your shipping address, they won't give a lot of that information back to the merchant. They'll like say, no, we're only giving you the country and the city, and you work out the shipping like to the merchant. It's like, merchant, you work out from that information, that's all you're getting. And if you can work that out, then like ship this item to the person. So that's been really good. So again, I talked about credit cards, and I showed you a little bit of that, how you can manage your credit cards, payment details, having a nice sheet where you can see like, these are the things that I'm buying, having a total, having that in an accessible manner as well. Shipping options, being able to select through those, again, just simple lists that you can run through. Make your selection, and then, so essentially getting an overall view of things. The API allows you to do tricky things like, if you're paying with an Amex, you have to pay 3% more. It's like things that merchants want, which is kind of cool. So again, payment options. So as I mentioned, these are things that are needed to complete a payment, things like an email address. Error recovery, if you don't have an email address entered, it will force you to enter it. It has very nice fine-grained control for that. And as I showed briefly before, once everything's good and you hit pay, then you're basically on your way. So credit cards are great, but as I showed you, there's things like Apple Pay, which are not just credit card based. And we've all heard of the Bitcoin bubble as well. So I'm sorry if you haven't, like, it's being stuck in the payment space. That's all like people talk about. So essentially there's a lot of merchants and a lot of shops that people interact with, like Amazon and Shopify and so on. So collaborating with those people has been like super interesting because, again, they want to create these easy to access experiences for everybody. So we're trying to like bring those people in as well. So again, beyond just paying with your credit card. And the nice thing is that we can also integrate with native payment systems. So a lot of people will be using, for instance, PayPal on their phone as a way of paying for things, or a way of managing their finances. So a website could, in theory, given what we're building, interface together with a payment handler such as PayPal, or any native payment provider. So again, it wouldn't be the web unless we brought all this stuff, also from the web. So you can basically create. We're working on a way of actually creating or allowing general websites to just become web applications that can basically handle payments for you, which is kind of cool. So anybody can go and set up like a place where, or set up a website where people can enter their credit card details and you can store it for them. I don't recommend you do that. There's a lot of like legal things around that, but like it is certainly possible. And I think we will see some really interesting like budgeting and financial things emerge, financial applications emerge that will really be quite helpful. And again, having this choice of like, okay, someone may really focus on accessibility. Remember that on the web and on standards, our main driver is basically to open things up. So we want to create these kind of like very accessible and very open experiences that anybody can participate in. So just a simple example, what I'm showing here is how a website could become one of these payment providers. There would be a step where the website would ask you for permission to manage your financial instruments, like your credit cards and so on. Not using that language, of course, financial instruments, but potentially you could do that. And eventually you could basically have your credit cards in place. And Google's currently working on this in Chrome today. So they've been actually working together with PayPal to make this happen. So, so their collaboration has been obviously quite fruitful. And we're hoping to make that happen. So in summary, for the payments part is essentially that we've taken forms and we've taken the idea that we can understand that there's common things that people do. Again, buying things online is something really common. And we can take all the bits that go into that, put it into a nice little package that is nice and accessible and open for everybody. And we can basically create a nice experience and that is secure, that is privacy preserving, and doesn't require poor humans to go and enter things over and over again in a frustrating way. So they can make that into a single click process that takes away a lot of that pain, or a single step process, I should say. So the real risk for us who are working on this stuff is that it won't be adopted. That can happen for a number of reasons because we're basically competing with like Amazon and like, so all these experiences that are already like pretty good. The Shopify experience, even though we're working with Shopify, they're like, hey, we're still doing it better in this regard. And because we're centralizing things, that can be a little bit kind of like, So the other risk is that, because we do have fairly accessible technology already on the web, that it won't, we won't be able to make it as accessible as some things already are on the web. I think we can basically do or compete fairly well. So I'm sorry, I'm not reflected here, so I need to read my own thing. And like I said, with closed systems, the closed systems are pretty good, so Apple Pay and so on. But you have to be pretty rich, honestly, to have access to Apple Pay. You have to afford an iPhone. iPhones are really expensive, so most people don't have access to those. Even Android is still the bottom of the range. Android is still like $100. So there's a real risk that those systems could win. So again, at the same time, if we do this right, we do have a system where you just use your web browser, you select your web browser of choice, and you input your information once, and you can buy things anywhere. The really cool thing and the interesting part, similar to you, us who work on browsers, or in Gecko, we also make things using HTML. So these forms that you're seeing, there's no magic there. It's just HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So we go through exactly the same pain as any other developer does. And we also struggle making things accessible. So again, we need feedback from the community as well. So even though we have accessibility experts, not every user is the same. So we're always happy to hear back. I showed how we can leverage autofill as well. So we get that for free. We can leverage HTML validation as well. And just leveraging and improving the underlying web platform, which is really cool. So I promised you a sneak peek into the accessible future. I can't remember if I mentioned, but I am the chair, co-chair of what's called the Web Incubator Community Group at the W3C. And there, we are the group that takes whatever's upcoming for the web, and we make a first run at it. So our motto is write specs and fail fast. So we basically expect like a 95% failure rate. But with the accessibility folks that have been involved in our group, these are folks from Google, Apple, Microsoft, and just the general community at large, and Mozilla as well. We've made some real good progress. So I'll talk about, so web authentication is another one of these problems that we all face. Logging into websites. Like how many times a day do you have to log into a website? It's annoying, right? When it doesn't remember you. So we're looking at taking away that friction using a similar model to what I presented with the payments API. So if you get like a login thing and it's a single like biometric scan or something like that, that can take away some of that pain. Going to the more accessible side, the inert elements. So being able to say that an element is inert. So this is a really cool accessibility feature. So imagine there's a page or an article and with a bunch of ads. For accessibility reasons, normally what we would do is like hide those things. So we say like display none for those things so they don't end up in the accessibility tree. What we can do instead is say like mark these things as inert so they don't get muddled into, like even if they're animated or they're changing, so they don't get muddled into the accessibility tree. So they won't announce, they literally just become inert. So they basically just go away. So we can basically take them out of the accessibility tree. Focus ring is another really cool bit of tech. You would have seen this normally. So when we go to, not this one, when you like put your mouse on something, you notice that little ring that you can see. There's a little ring around items. So if we had more control over that, this is more for television, so making like television is a bit more accessible or other interfaces like that. So if we had better control of that, we can say like, okay, move that ring around where I need it. And you can basically do that. And lastly, the most important technology, and I think this is like, this is basically slated to be the biggest, most revolutionary technology that we're working on since ARIA, is the accessibility object model. And this is like the big one, so I saved it for last. And what this one allows us to do is, for upcoming technologies like, I don't know if you've heard of custom elements and Shadow DOM. So for these technologies, it basically allows you to have a special attribute, which is the, it's called the accessible node. And the accessible node allows you to reflect all the accessible aspects of an element and set them as well. So eventually what you can do is like, instead of having like, for instance, if you have a canvas, like a computer game, like you make a computer game, rather than representing that computer game with a bunch of like dips and spans to try to emulate what data is there, what's happening on the screen, you can literally go and put in, this is the accessible nodes, this is a menu, it has like, the role of this thing is a menu, it has these items in it, and you can basically lay out your accessibility tree. So this is a huge change and a huge win, or hopefully it's going to be a huge win for accessibility, because you won't need to mock up. Essentially, you won't need to mock things with HTML. You'll be able to use the API directly to access the accessibility tree. So this will be designed in multiple phases. There's like 4 phases. The first one is just being able to set like access directly as a developer. What is the role of this item? What is the type of this item? Like what does it do in the accessibility tree? And then from there, eventually, the end goal is to be able to access the whole accessibility tree. So again, this is being worked on with Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, and Apple. We're super excited about it. And we're hoping that it will come to the web pretty soon, in the next year or 2. And like I said, this one's the one, you heard it here first. This is going to be the big one. This is like the next ARIA, basically. So, any questions?
Time for maybe 2 questions. We're right on time. Maybe 1 or 2 questions at the most. Oh, sorry, Andrew, you were next. 2 questions. Good.
Oh, I think I might have two of my own, but I'll try to be quick. So for the focus ring, I guess this is more a comment than a question. One of the current frustrations is that the different browsers have different default focus rings. Two of the browsers have a really thin dotted line. Two of them have a little blue line that pretty much disappears around blue objects.
Yep.
So is the focus ring work that you're talking about, would that enable the user to like customize the focus ring, or
Yes,
what would that be?
which they can already do. But the idea would be to kind of standardize and all that, so we don't end up with these weirdo focus rings.
Okay. And for the accessibility object model, is that intended for HTML or only for inside Canvas?
No, it's intended for everything. So for for HTML as well as for inside Canvas or for like a custom element or anything like that.
Okay, so for default elements, it would be
Yeah.
filled automatically, and
Yep.
for custom elements, the developer would be able to
So then,
tweak it.
So the idea is that for custom elements, you don't need to write like aria role. You can actually just say like, this is a menu, and then internally you can say the role of this thing is actually a menu. So it's really cool for that. So you don't need to like sprout all these extra attributes for it.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Just to follow up on that one, I'm really interested in the accessibility tree, and it would seem like a no-brainer to actually have a way of reading that within the, the DOM Explorer, F12, and just go straight into the accessibility tree. That'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's like what we're really excited about. So incrementally working towards exposing that is the ultimate goal. So that's like step 4 is basically exposing the whole thing. So there's already like developer tools that obviously do that, but just having full access to it and you can manipulate it in real time, that's the real goal.
Last question.
With the paying the bill through the browser,
Yep.
sounds like a very convenient option. But if, for example, I invited Russ over to my place and I left my study for a few seconds, what's to stop him from buying all sorts of stuff with my browser?
So, yeah. So yeah, if you leave your computer unlocked, you're kind of like, you could be in trouble. But no, we are, again, looking at putting security measures in there as well. So that's why I mentioned the biometric aspect. So having using your finger to validate the payment. And also we don't show or allow people to access directly the credit card number. So things like that. So there is obviously a risk that somebody could come and like sit down at your computer and impersonate you. But like that physical attack on your financial information, it requires somebody to like be on your computer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.